AI can only repeat what's already been done. It can't come up with anything new. Like, AI is trained on the past. It cannot really look forward into the future.
I'm Tom Horak, and this is Changing Shapes, a podcast where I sit with people who are shaping culture through the things they make, to explore the relationship between idea, maker, and audience and how to get it right. Today I get to sit down with a creative director and storyteller. My guest today is Sabine Devins. She often works with B2B tech businesses, the kinds of companies that are building genuinely interesting technology but haven't quite figured out how to communicate that beyond their niche. One of the things that strikes me is that the number one skill that we need today is good storytelling. I mean, everybody has to become a storyteller, right? I'm doing it, every business owner, everybody needs to have their online profile in some shape or form. Now, we find that AI can research, analyze, build, and generate, and it can do most of the things that we used to call knowledge work. And in that context, you'd think that the most valuable skills would be more technical, so coding, data analysis, systems thinking. But what I'm seeing is that it's not. The thing that is becoming most important is good storytelling. And that completely flips the script that we've been treating the humanities in the workspace as the lesser degree, as the soft skill, as the nice to have. Storytelling isn't valuable because it's hard or creative or in some way expressive. It's valuable because fundamentally it's a human to human act. Why would you care what a machine has to say to you? You want to connect with people, with other humans who have lived experiences.
I cannot tell you how many people I've worked with where I say, you have to use LinkedIn. And they're like, because the worst thing, and I think we all have that, is blank page syndrome, where we're all just kind of like staring at the page and we say, what do we do? I think connection is really like, everything. It's like literally everything. Because I think it's like, it's our friendships. It's how we build trust. And I think that's really what the core of it is like, how do we kind of come across as trustworthy? And I love Love is Blind. What motivates me watching it every season is to see those couples who have obviously genuine connections on this stupid TV show. What we're looking for through connection is being able to build trust with each other and having that sort of safe space where we feel seen and heard and where we have connections.
Generally, we find that with storytelling, the trend that we're all seeing is once we feel that we're being told a story from a machine, we switch off, we're not interested. AI fatigue is real. We are craving that connection between humans, and the facsimile that an LLM can provide is just not the same thing, and it makes building a relationship with a machine feel off and strange and not so valuable. The effort and the struggle and the training up to there, that's where the meaning comes from. Parallel in storytelling is just because I can write an 8,000-word essay doesn't mean it's coming from an inner thought and an actual lived experience. Just because the words exist doesn't immediately give them meaning. The meaning is because it comes from another human.
I was on assignment with National Geographic. I was working with a photographer and a reporter who were both from the United States. They were in Germany, and I was working as their fixer. And the photographer that I was working with, I was kind of talking to her about like, I don't know what to call myself. And she was actually the one, she's like, you're just a storyteller. And I think then that was really, for me, just nice to finally have something that I could categorize myself as, because all the things that I was doing, it was about getting stories out there. It was connecting people. It was, connecting, like using my words to connect with people. And that's really what storytelling is. And so I think fostering that connection, I would say, still was my original why and has always sort of been what I've always worked for, like connecting people with either, like in journalism, connecting people with the news of the day, or, connecting people with stories, or even in that world as a producer, connecting, my clients with their interview subjects and all of that stuff. So it was always about fostering connection. And I think that's still very much about what I do today. It's about helping companies and brands connect with their customers and finding those customers, connect with their purpose, connect with investors, connect being able to sort of find that story and fostering that connection in their communities or on their channels or wherever, is really good at seeing patterns. And as a former business journalist, I appreciate that it can look at statistics. We can do the same thing. I can also look at patterns of imports, exports, and having a good idea of where economies are going and things like that. AI does the same thing there too, and it does it really well. But what AI is not good at is outliers, unpredictability, really new things, concepts, and things like that. And we are always going to have that, and we are going to have that more and more and more. And the other side of things is the output of AI also is, it's really the common denominator. We're always looking at the common denominator whenever we see something from what the output of AI is. And so I think we're always going to have true creativity, and that kind of emerges that still needs to come from us.
She has two questions she applies to all of her work. I would argue those two questions are extremely relevant in product design as well.
It's what's the point and who cares? What do you want to say and who do you want to say it to? And really being able to sort of hone that in to say what's the point and who cares really helps shape the story. I always go back to this example that I had. I used to work at an agency for infographics and data visualization. And I had a colleague, Dr. Annie Peller, who came up with this brilliant example where she says, we want to explain butterflies, but we want to do, if you explain butterfly, the senses of a butterfly to children, you want to say, I smell with my feet, I taste with this, I hear with these holes kind of thing. You really kind of focus on turning it into something that children will understand. Whereas if you want to do it for a more advanced crowd, you could say my olfactory glands are found in my legs. You're saying the same thing, but for two very different audiences and on two very different levels. And you're telling the same story, but you're really shaping that story of who cares by answering who cares. And so I think those are the sort of the two ways where you have that one hand, that kind of that brand voice and that drive, that purpose, the why. And then as you start building into the content, really focusing on making sure that every piece answers your why, but also then takes it further into what's the point and who cares.
What Sabine explained to me was that the context is what turns data into something that matters and can lead to action.
My whole journey with sort of the data storytelling and the finding the human in the data actually really started with Brexit. I was working as a journalist, and I was working primarily for business publications. And at the time of Brexit, I was working for Handelsblatt, the German business newspaper, for their English language site. And I remember we were all reporting on the fall of the pound and how the pound is losing its value and everything. And at the same time, I read an interview on the BBC where someone says, 20% of my retirement is gone. And so that became a very human voice to the statistic that we're all talking about. We talk so much about the value of currencies, but what we don't talk about is what does that implication have for people? And so that was a really big click for me to sort of say wait, we're talking about this, but what's missing is context. And so being able to look at data in the context of society, in the context of what's happening, in the context of human lives, and seeing what does this mean for us? And this is a big part of communication, whereas when you talk about something, a lot of people, when they see it, they'll say, well, what does this mean for me? You're a company, you're announcing, oh, we're going to restructure, we're going to reorganize. The first thing people are going to ask, what does this mean for me? As a business reporter, you're talking about the values of things dropping, and everyone's what does this mean for me? And, even with current conversations like Bitcoin dropping kind of thing, we hear about this, but we rarely think, what does this mean for me? But what we're missing is that there are huge public pension funds that are also investing in Bitcoins that are losing their money, that are also suddenly private pension funds are losing that. And so I think it's really when you come down to data, when you come to those millions of lives, one death is a tragedy, a million is a statistic, talking about what does that mean for me? What does that mean for society?
In the product space, it's the same. If you understand how to connect with the people who are interacting with your product and show them the relevant information, the relevant features, the relevant action points, then and there when they need it, they will instantly connect with that product. And that consideration goes into every point of the product, whether it's the blank state, when people open the product for the first time, or whether it's how people navigate your product after they've been using it for years.
A project that I did when I was at the infographics group was an analysis of hacked password data. In 2019, I think, there was like the largest ever tranche of hacked password data released. We were working with 5.8 billion data points at this kind of level. The story that we really wound up pulling out of there was how humans are creatures of habits and how we put in sort of this minimal effort to things. Like, we wound up doing heat maps of these passwords, and what we saw in the beginning was, okay, the most common password length was 8 letters long, because one, password is 8 letters long. And the two, it's changed now, but at the time, the advice when we had to create a new password, and how many times we have to create new passwords in our lives, in our daily business these days, because everything has an account, the recommendation was your password should be a minimum of 8 letters long. So we did the bare minimum. Mm-hmm. And I would go on talks and I talk about this, and I see people in the audience going, counting on their fingers and then being like, and then what we saw, we then looked to see where were the different characters. So we said, where are the capital letters in our passwords? And it was very clear we capitalized the beginning of our passwords just as we do our sentences, our names, and everything. And then I see the people looking at their fingers like, and then we have to add a number, right? So we do it like we do the Super Bowl, where we throw the number at the end, and we see that kind of trend going on too. And at this point, I have people being like, sliding out of their chairs, that human reaction to that tells me, okay, I found the human story.
We also dug into the power of good storytelling and the fact that the motivations of the people doing the storytelling don't necessarily have to be in everybody's best interest. It's important to remember to be skeptical and to ask, like Sabine teaches her kids, what is the person's motivation for telling me the story that they're telling?
I do talk to my kids about this too, and one thing that I've always said to them is also say, well, what's in it for them? Like, what's in it for the storyteller in this place? What do they want from you? And will they actually give you what you're promising? And this is something that I think we also grew up with, pre-election, algorithms and all of that stuff. When you think about like advertorials or infomercials and things like that. I remember once being like a 13-year-old and having, or like a 12-year-old and having like a teen magazine where I totally fell for an advertorial where I was like, wow, this is amazing, this product. But of course it was like literally written to sell me that product. But disguised in a way that came across as like a journalistic entry. And so I think it's really just making sure that like checking yourself, well, like, why is somebody else telling you this?
Skepticism is good, but also too much of it can lead to not trusting politicians and scientists and experts. And I think the important thing that Sabine does really well is also bringing a level of transparency combined with joy, which I think is so important, because if we don't have an optimistic outlook and have a level of joy in what we're talking about, it's so easy for skepticism to win.
Explore all the places that storytelling will take you, because it has taken me in so many places. I have such a broad range of experience. I've met so many people. I've connected with so many people through storytelling, through telling their stories, through like asking to be told my story and all of that stuff. And I think, yeah, going back to those fostering relationships, and just my world is so much richer because of my work and because of all the sort of touch points that I've had in my career. And I would say that's the thing that I would say is the thing I would be more excited about, is just how big their world will get through reading stories, through consuming stories, and this is for everybody, and then telling stories. It gives you a real big world too.
Now that's a tough thing to balance, because while being professional and transparent and clear and trustworthy, you can't be over the top funny usually. Somehow bringing Sabine's level of positivity and optimism while also being transparent and clear does elevate trust. And I think trust is just as important as skepticism, and deciding between the two today isn't always easy. So the thing I keep coming back to is that every product and every piece of content and every business interaction is some sort of a relationship. And like in every relationship, trust is built through consistency, but it can also be lost in an instant. So if I'm saying that the food that I produce is healthy and organic, then it has to be like that all the time. That means that the ingredients and the farming and everything in the process needs to align with what I'm saying that the food that I'm producing is. The moment that doesn't align, the trust is gone. And it becomes quite difficult often to regain that trust. So I think the storyteller's question is very similar to the product designer's question. What are you actually giving and to whom?